Glad you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I am sorry. I am sorry. I'm sorry. I am sorry. If you just pause for a second, I want you to think, if someone was sitting in this chair, who are you like in friction with right now? What's a person in your life that you might even be like at tension with? Relational tension, like things aren't really going as planned. There's something inside the relationship that is just kind of there. You may just be indifferent. There may not even be this actual thing that you're fighting with someone about, but your relationship with this person is just kind of, Someone maybe that you're cut off from. Like who's sitting in this chair right now in your life that you've been cut off from, or maybe that you've cut off? Who's someone that is distant? You wish maybe they weren't distant? Who's sitting in this chair for you right now? I don't have more than one chair, so just one person. Who's the person that gets brought up when you think about this idea of, I am sorry? The words, I am sorry. Who's sitting here? Now, with that person in mind, as we just kind of work through this morning a little bit, keeping them sitting in this chair as you kind of navigate the ins and outs of your life and the scriptures, and you kind of hold these things up in a mirror, I want you to think about you saying, I am sorry, to this person sitting right here. Maybe it's someone that's hurt you. Maybe it's someone that you've hurt. Maybe it's both. But whatever the friction is causing, what starts to come up inside of you when you start to think about going to them and saying, I'm sorry? What are the thoughts? What are some of the feelings? What are some of the emotions that you have? We want to continue in our series this morning, being open. And what we're trying to do is look through the book of James. So James, half-brother of Jesus. I love it because he brings like this reality to who Jesus is, because like they grew up and probably wrestled and like did things that brothers do. But then he also knows Jesus as like the Son of God. And James writes to the church about the ways in which he wants the church to live out life with Jesus. And we look at a number of statements in which we want to say, hey, being open in relationship, there's some statements that could actually help us build relational connection. And so even whether you have this person in mind yet or not, I just want you to think about this past week. Like, how did you do with saying, I'm sorry? How'd you do? Did you have a chance like anywhere to say, I'm sorry? Anybody like mess up this week or like do some? Am I the only one? Like multiple times a day? Okay, well, let's put it this way. So you may not be able to think of the way you apologize or not, but can you think about the worst apology you've ever received? Like someone coming to you and being like, I'm sorry, but like if you weren't such a jerk, then I wouldn't have been a jerk. You know, like that. Like again, like you would never apologize this way and say you're sorry, but if other people would do that one. It's the I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, I was doing this or I was feeling this way. I'm sorry, but if you just hadn't done this thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So if it's hard to say I'm sorry, like that's just my starting point right now. Like if you think about this last week, how many times did you say I'm sorry? How'd you do? How many opportunities did you have? Why did you avoid it? Why did you not actually say I'm sorry? And then how did that play out in the relationship? Where's the relationship stand right now where you could have said I'm sorry? It might be the person sitting next to you right now. Maybe it's the roommate. It's the long-standing friend you've had from high school. That no matter how long you stay friends, this thing keeps coming up and you just don't know how to fix it or to solve it. And you feel distant, you feel intention, you hold resentment, you have a grudge. And what I want to propose this morning is that saying I am sorry more often provides an opportunity for you to have deeper and better relationships in your life. And it doesn't mean that you're supposed to be deeply connected and have relationships with every single person that you come in contact with. But if you think about the people in your immediate circles, if you think about the person that is sitting here in this chair that you have wronged, that you've fallen short of their expectations, that you did not hold your word, that maybe you gossiped about, it's that person that you really know how to say that one thing that like cuts deep because you know them well and you just like, you really drove it in this last week. Maybe that's something on repeat. Like as you have them in mind, I want to turn to James and we want to look a little bit about what he has to say and why actually being good at I'm sorry will make a difference. So James says this in chapter 5. Therefore, confess your sins. Therefore, confess. Does that make you feel like uncomfortable at all? Traditionally, when I read this passage, I think about like, okay, we got to get in a room and we just have to share like the deepest, darkest depravities of our life with one another. Oh, I got to tell someone like all the things that's inside of me that aren't good or aren't right, the things that I wrestle with, the habitual disobedience or the patterns of my life that are harmful or destructive, the things I don't know are good. Therefore, confess your sin. So then to think about actually doing that, I want to avoid this immediately. Confess your sins to each other. Hold on, go back to that. I'm going to finish that one. Confess to each other and pray for each other so you may be healed. So on first read, I think about therefore confess your sins. It's something that I'm bringing up out of myself that I individually need to bring this up. But then all of a sudden, I do it for the sake of someone else so that we could pray for each other. And that I could be healed. And maybe even that we can be healed. So confessing our sins can actually be done something in relationship, not just for the sake of my individual life, but for the sake of our relationship, my relationship with another person. And to break this word down a little bit, because sin can get thrown out and we just have this word out there and sometimes we think we know what it means, like really when we look at someone else's life or like that they're sinning, they sin. But if we think about our own life, we may not be as aware of them, but ultimately what we're looking at in this idea of sin is that God has a way and a pattern of life for us, and that sin is generally just not living up to that. Like there's an area in our life where we're just kind of missing the fullness of life that God is calling us to. We're falling a bit short of all that he has for us in every single area of our life. We're missing a mark. So to confess to each other, to confess to one another, confessing your sins, in so many ways is to name the areas you fell short with somebody else. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And what James says on the back end of that is you do that so that you can be healed, so that there can be restoration, so that there can be wholeness, so that you can actually be in right relationship. I'm sorry. How did you do this week at saying, I'm sorry? How'd you do? What were the moments that went well? What are the other moments that you missed? What are the moments that didn't go so well? What were the ones where you said, I'm sorry, but? You have them? And again, who's this person? Who's the person sitting in the chair right now that you actually might need to confess your sins to, that you might actually need to say, I'm sorry? Who's that person? Now, if I'm sorry can lead to wholeness, if it can lead to healing, if it can lead to everything being in right standing, like if that's a way in which our relationships can be better, like why does it have to be so hard? Why I don't know about you, but saying I'm sorry, like this week alone, because I'm in this passage sitting with it, the amount of times I found myself being like, okay, Ryan, like you've read the passage, you're sitting with it, you're going to talk about it. I had so many more moments this week where I was in a position where I needed to say, I'm sorry. It was horrible because I'm sitting there wanting to be defensive, want to judge the other person, want to say, yeah, but, I'm sorry, but, and do you feel that ever? And I found myself like even having to like literally bite my tongue to just listen and wait and then just say, I'm sorry. And it took everything in my being to do that. It was so hard. And there's one psychologist that said this, and I think this is really helpful. So we're gonna play around with this quote for a second. Apologizing, saying I'm sorry, temporarily reduces one's self-esteem. The offender who apologizes yields some power, some control. Having announced their imperfection and error, the offender is now vulnerable. It takes humility to make a sincere apology, and for some people, humility is just too uncomfortably close to humiliation. Okay, let's just highlight some of these words. Reduces one's self-esteem, yields some power, some control, announced their imperfection and error. The offender is now vulnerable. It takes humility, and it's uncomfortably close to humiliation. Just in that little paragraph, all the things that get brought up, I don't know about you, but I feel every little bit of these, sometimes more than others, depending on what I'm needing to say I'm sorry about. Because oftentimes I can paint an image that says, well, I didn't mess up. I'm fine. It's okay. And there's a piece in which I'm actually coming to somebody and saying, hey, I missed the mark. I fell short. I didn't actually carry out the thing that I want to. I didn't show up the way that I was hoping to. I am sorry. Like, how are you doing there in life right now, in that area? How are you doing? Are you quick to say it? Are you slow to say it? Is it more often, I'm sorry, but? Or maybe the one that's like, okay, I'm sorry. Like, just leave me alone. I'm sorry. And it's just like, just to like move on, like just dismiss the thing, dismiss the person. Like, I get it, I'm sorry. So what I want to do is propose a way in which we can grow in this. Here's a little bit of an image, and in a second, we're gonna have a little conversation about this. But because of all the things internally, just to name it, like this takes work. So like if you're here this morning and you're like, man, I really would like my relationships to be better. Like, I just want my relationships to be great. I mean, I'm not the problem, it's the other people in the relationship. But like, I still want them to be good, okay? And I can think about this one person in the chair, and like, I actually want us to have a good relationship. I don't want something to be in between us. I don't want to keep letting them down or hurting them, being short with them, cutting them. I don't want that to keep happening. So what we need to do is actually have a way in which we can go about saying I'm sorry. And what's weird is asking for forgiveness is pretty much a third step here. But a part of it really is just acknowledging that, an example here is that I didn't keep my word, but it's acknowledging that I fell short, that I missed the mark, that I didn't actually live up to the thing that they deserve. I didn't live up to the thing that I wanted to. The starting point is, can I be a person that recognizes that I fall short and that I want to do better? And then we actually get present to something. We actually want to know the impact that it has on the other person. So, hey, look, I'm sorry. I didn't like mean to do that. I didn't want that to happen. And rather than being dismissive, like well, if you weren't a jerk, then I wouldn't have been a jerk. It actually says, hey, can you tell me how that impacted you? Yeah, I gossiped about you and you found out. Like, how'd that make you feel? You know, hey, I did that thing again that I told you a million times I wasn't going to do anymore. How'd that make you feel? And then they actually tell you, this is how this impacted me. And now you actually step into their world to realize something that you otherwise wouldn't about yourself. And then we actually ask for forgiveness, and then we recommit. Being like, hey, I've heard the impact, and I'm really sorry for this, and this, very specifically, and I want to do better. Can you help me with that? Here's the ways in which I could have help from you. So I want to do, Dusty, you want to come up? So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation around this. Because of the internal world that's attached to all of this, and as you sit here this morning thinking about the person that's in this chair, I just want you to become present to like why it's going to be so hard to say I'm sorry. Why is it hard with this person to say I'm sorry? And becoming present to like what's going on inside of you. So Dusty's going to confess all of his sins to us right now. Yikes. It's going to be the best. But no, so like this is from Emotionally Focused. We have another retreat coming up November 18th and 19th. I would encourage you if you have not done it yet. But this is some of the stuff that you've worked through, that you've committed to, that you're bringing into relationships, however many times that goes well or doesn't. But like there's been attempts and trying these things on. What comes up for you, just in the initial being, even thinking about that experience? True. Yeah. You want to do it now? Do you need to say I'm sorry to me?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Cool. So I told you I was going to talk to my boss about getting an extra week of vacation, and I didn't do that.
Okay.
We had a timeline, like 30 days, and I just kind of didn't do it. So I'm confessing that to you.
Got it.
And I want to know the impact that had on you.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually felt like you just didn't care. I felt dismissed because we had the plan, we talked about it, you committed to it, and it seems like you just didn't value what we talked about and my thoughts and my input and the things that we said. Yeah, so I felt dismissed.
Yeah, that wasn't my intention. I was pretty nervous to talk to my boss. I don't want to be rejected. I think that's a big point. Talking to him and him telling me like, you're not worth another week of, vacation, so I think I let that get in the way of me talking to him and then not following up with you in that space. So, and really think about you in that moment. So, yeah. So I want to apologize to you for not doing what I said I was going to do.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the last step going forward?
Yeah, so re-promising. So I guess it would be having that conversation with my boss, which is still nerve-wracking. I really don't want to have it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I think it would be committing to that timeline. And that's kind of hard for me. I think that's where, for me, this kind of process is like, well, I still don't really want to talk to him. I'd rather just sacrifice a week of vacation because, I don't know, kind of makes me anxious, But I think Megan would appreciate it for sure,
How can I help with that?
I think we've done like coaching calls in the past, so I think maybe having a conversation before that occurs, that's, if I do it in like a week, that day, kind of saying, hey, I'm going to talk to my boss today, what would it look like for us to kind of talk through some of the anxiousness that day? Hello? Okay.
Good.
So that would be helpful for me.
Good.
What would be helpful for you?
Yeah, I'm in. I would love to just, do that again with you and see it through. And then I can just follow up after the set date that we said you'll have the conversation by.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm in. I appreciate you apologizing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
fun. That was real, right?
Yeah,
that
that
just
was real.
happened.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was going to happen. That was real.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk this out. Wait, what'd you say?
Oh, no, yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know where to go from here. So, this is great. But so walk it back as you think going through this, and you've tried this on in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenges for you specifically to overcome, to go and say I'm sorry after you've caused harm?
I think my vow is like, I don't want to make mistakes publicly.
What's a vow?
A vow is like a core commitment that I've lived out of for a lot of my life. And it comes from I don't know if we have that image, but it comes from an experience that I had where I made meaning of that experience by kind of doubling down and self-protecting. I think that's kind of creating that vow. So I made a mistake, got in trouble, and said, hey, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to feel that way. So I'm going to avoid having to be embarrassed or make mistakes. So I just won't try to do stuff. That's like one way that I've showed up in that. Yeah.
And so in that, it would be hard for you to admit that you fell short in an area.
Yeah, because then we're both looking at that together, being like, hey, I fell short. You know that, I know that.
Yeah.
Before I just knew that, and maybe you knew that, but I didn't know that you knew that.
Yeah.
So that's easier for me to kind of be like, let's pretend like I didn't screw up, and then we could pretend.
Well, and run with that idea of pretending. Like, what's that do for you? How's that feel carrying that, whatever it is? Like, what's the pressure in there for you to pretend?
Well, it's kind of phony. I mean, I live in a relationship in that context where I'm like, hey, I know this thing that's happened, and I'm not able to be as like real or authentic with that relationship. That's kind of one way. So I think that's one area. I think I carry a little bit of shame in that. If you really knew what I did, even if it's minuscule, and this isn't always, it's like in every single thing, but in bigger things, you wouldn't want to hang out with me. I wouldn't be invited to this or that event. And
Yeah.
we wouldn't text or whatever the relationship is. Just wouldn't occur anymore.
Yeah. So anytime that you don't do the thing you said you're going to do, or you fall short, or you didn't live up to whatever the expectation is, whether it's someone else's or yours, there becomes this thing of shame. So you're almost replaying this script over and over again every time that happens.
Oh, totally.
And that's like, I don't know, once a week you mess up or more?
Yeah.
A lot?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what's the pressure internally? Like just for you, not even thinking about the relationship side yet.
I mean, I think internally, I don't know. I experience it like in my gut. So, probably as anxiety. And then shame. I guess I don't know, off the top of my head where that occurs in my body as much, but there is shame that kind of, goes through my body as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's like an internal pressure that I put on myself.
Yeah.
I have to be perfect in this relationship.
Yeah.
And kind of walk through life perfect, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of stereotypical.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that keeps you from saying, I'm sorry, or can keep you. What actually happens when you get to a point of saying, I'm sorry, and admitting that you fell short? What happens for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, like, I talk about nerves a lot, but there is that kind of nervous kind of butterfly thing that I take into that conversation. But then there's a huge relief, I think, ultimately. I haven't really done this where the person's been like, yeah, you're done. I'm cutting you off. So most of the time, I think there's a relief that kind of follows internally. So that's part of it.
Yeah. So there's a freedom that comes.
Yeah.
And you find yourself like better than before. Does the shame go away? Do you feel okay about yourself? Like,
yeah.
Okay. And then what's that do for the relationship?
I mean, it really does kind of draw us closer together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that the relationship's kind of repaired. At least it starts to become repaired.
Yeah.
And we're closer.
Yeah.
There's an authenticity there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, now it's on the table. So, why was I hiding that in the first place?
Yeah.
I'm human. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Can we thank Dusty for sharing a little bit and trying that on? So some of that, and again, Dusty's done certain work around some things that we're trying to encourage all of us to step into. And so there's some other language being used there that really is important and matters. But the piece just kind of there at the end, like for you right now, again, thinking about this person who you might be feeling led to say, I'm sorry to. That right now, maybe even you started to realize an area that you made a mistake in the relationship with them that you weren't even aware of before this morning, and you're thinking back to this previous week or this previous month. As they're sitting here right now, what's the story you're telling yourself of why you can't say I'm sorry? What's the story? Do you need to keep an image? Do you not want to admit? Are you fearful of their reaction? Do you not want to be disappointed? Did someone tell you that saying I'm sorry shows weakness? You can't show emotion. You can't let other people actually know who you are. And like, what's the story you tell yourself that keeps you from saying I'm sorry? And then just take a minute, the best you can with this person in mind, looking at this chair, asking God's Spirit to say, what would it look like for me to do this right now? What's maybe the area I fell short in this relationship that it would be good for me to acknowledge that I fell short? And then imagine yourself having the conversation that says, hey, I didn't live up to this piece. Can you let me know how that felt? Can you tell me how that impacted you? Then you get to a point of saying, wow, I didn't think those words that I used or that thing I did or how I left you hanging and didn't let you know I wasn't going to show up, or I promised to follow through on this and I didn't. I didn't realize that was going to actually do that. And I could imagine that you're pretty angry with me or whatever it is. And it's like, I don't want that to happen again. I want to do better. Can you help me? And I want to retry this thing. Can we try it again? Who's the person? Who is it that you could take a risk and say I'm sorry to, in the hopes of you become free from the narrative that you're playing out, the shame, the guilt, playing out all the scenarios and why this isn't going to go well or why I can't tell them or why I can't admit, to become free from that, to actually be in a place that that says like you can be forgiven, that you can actually receive grace. And then start to imagine what happens with that relationship. As Dusty named, it seems that anytime he presses into this, and it's always a two-sided thing, it takes two to tango here, but for you, like you have now given an opportunity for someone to draw near, to draw closer. So what's it worth to not say I'm sorry? What's it worth to not admit that you fell short? Is that sacrificing that relationship, is it worth it? To protect yourself, to keep your image? Is that distanced relationship worth protecting yourself? Having cut off from people that you would like to be closer with, is it worth not saying, I'm sorry? I think what ultimately happens here, and the big piece that we can miss that James talks about here, whenever we read the word therefore, it's helpful to go before a little bit, but he says, if they have sinned, they'll be forgiven. In James' whole bit here, in the context, it's about healing. It's about being restored. It's about being made whole. And his whole premise, his starting point for you to go and say, I'm sorry, is that there's a God who has already forgiven. There is a God who is waiting to extend grace on grace on grace after he has already established a foundation of grace to invite you into life with him. For each of us, that we can stand here and say, if they have sinned, they will be forgiven. I can be forgiven for my shortcomings. I can actually walk out of shame and guilt and relational distance and the things I beat myself up about and the stories that I play out in my head over and over again that I'm not good enough and I can't be enough. And I just don't want to even open up that box with someone else. That's too much. It's out of my control. Now I'm giving them power and I need to keep control and power. And I can't let that go. Well, that's humiliating. I don't want to be humiliated, but it's humility that actually invites God into our lives, the grace that he has extended to us. So I think that there's a piece that actually says, yes, relational connection can come from this, saying I'm sorry. And it's not just the statement, but like each of the statements we're working through is actually your posture. There's actually a value that you're saying that I value this relationship so much. I'm willing to say I'm sorry, and it's because I know that I am already loved. It's because I know that there is a God who's extended a grace that even when I fall short, he is there, drawing me closer and closer and closer, that I actually cannot fall out of his grace. And I can live from that place with other people because now it's humility, not humiliation, that invites us into growth. And I wonder, even if you can't think of the person, you're not in some relational turmoil, you're distant from other people and it doesn't matter, you're okay with it. I wonder if you growing closer with God right now starts with you saying, I'm sorry to somebody. I wonder if saying I'm sorry is a way that actually opens you and I up to experience God more and more and more. Maybe you're frustrated with religion. Maybe you feel distant from God. Because now if you've played out, think about all the people you wish would say, I am sorry. Could you imagine a world in which people who hold power were able to say I'm sorry after they abused their power? Do you imagine the atrocities that we experience day in and day out in our neighborhoods, our cities, and our world because people are not willing to say, I am sorry? Because it actually gives away the power that we also want and desire and live from. So yes, can relational connection come from this from other people? Absolutely. But can you actually experience more of God when you feel dry, when you feel distant, when you feel stuck, when you feel like I just don't even know what to feel? Maybe it starts with saying, I am sorry. Because over and over and over again, the beauty of life with God and with Jesus is that while we were far off, while we were against, while we were enemies of, God sends his son. He loves us. He moves towards us. And it's in the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus that God's grace has been extended to us while we were missing the mark, a mark that we cannot make up on our own. We live from a place of grace. We live from a place that we've already been forgiven, so I can freely just say, I am sorry. I am sorry. I don't have to earn the forgiveness. I live from the forgiveness. And you and I can walk around every single time we messed up so quickly being like, I'm sorry. how did that feel? I want to actually step into the pain a little bit with you because I want to grow. I want to become a more whole, better person. I actually want to become more loving and kind and patient. And oftentimes it means that I have to be reminded of the grace that I live from. Every single time I say I am sorry, it's a reminder that God is so good and loving and extends grace to you and I and the people we hate. He is so, so good. I am sorry. I am sorry. I mean, how many more can you just like daily? Man, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And I don't have to get defensive. I don't have to try to defend myself. Well, I'm sorry, but like, if I, like, why? Can we just invite the idea that we do not have it all together, that we do fall short? And man, we can grow there. When we actually come in touch with that, when we come in touch with the pain that we cause other people, and we listen, and we respond and say, man, I want to do better. Sorry. And I think just to kind of wrap this up, saying I'm sorry reveals who you are and whose you are. You are forgiven already. You are loved. You are free. You don't have to live from the shame and this guilt and these narratives that play out telling you that you cannot say sorry. But it's also whose you are. Because I can live from a place saying that I am God's, that I am loved, that I'm chosen, and that He has a plan for you and I, that we are to prosper, not necessarily prosperity, but to prosper, to have a blessed life that says I can find joy whether I have much or I have little, whether someone has wronged me or unkindly to me, I can still grow. I can still live from a place of grace and love. And it's hard to extend grace if we can't receive it first ourselves. Isn't that true of so many things? If I've never actually experienced care in my life, how in the world do I know how to care for somebody else? It's often quite, how can I actually become a more gracious, giving, kind, generous person if I am not willing to admit the areas in which I need grace? And may that every single time I say I'm sorry, it's an opportunity for God's Spirit to do and work in me to say, yeah, you fall short, but man, you are loved. You fall short, but man, you are mine. May you be reminded of how much I love you. May you be reminded of the grace that I have extended to you. See, it's not just the statement, it's the posture. It's a posture of a person who is willing to say, I'm sorry over and over and over and over again. Because you value relational connection. You value relational connection with others, and you value relational connection with God. And if you feel stuck, if you feel far off, if you feel like you don't know what your next step is, if you feel like God has left you, if you feel like you've been hurt by the church, whatever it is, I would encourage you to just try on, I'm sorry, with other people and even with God. So all the way back, who's sitting here this week, this afternoon, in an hour? Who are you texting? Who are you calling? Who are you inviting to coffee? Who are you going to do this with? Who are you going to recognize your shortcomings with? Who are you actually going to process and hear how it impacted them? Who are you going to say I'm sorry to? I want to do better. Can you help me? Who is it? And man, I believe God is with you there. God is so in that. And allow Him to do the work that only He can do. Because you're somebody that says, I can live from grace. So one more time, I am sorry. Do that this week. Imagine your neighbor. Can you imagine your family? How much that can just change right now? Imagine a world in which people are willing to say, I'm sorry. And then the next step is just to do it. I'm sorry.